Good evening, everyone. My name's Arsh Ellahi. I'd like to thank you for your time this evening. I appreciate that you could be going out doing other things, watching TV, spending time with your family and friends, but you've decided to spend the evening with me. How lucky are you? Tonight, we're going to be talking about a strategy. Admittedly, I haven't been doing it for the longest period of time. I've been doing it the best part of 18 months. And if I'm going to be completely honest, it's not a strategy that I even concentrated on up until recently. And it's called Rent to Rent. And we're going to be talking to you about tonight about how you can actually make it work, how you can make it work for you in a very short space of time, and how you can actually make quite a lot of cash flow from it. Right. A little bit about me, my business partner. I always do this in all my webinars. As I said, my name's Arsh Ellahi. I run a group of 9 or 10 companies with my business partner, Aki Ellahi, and together we're accidental landlords and accidental letting agents. We've been letting property since 1973. The funny thing is that I wasn't actually born in 1973. I was born in 1980, and the way that I got into property is that my father had a small portfolio of properties. When I left university, I decided to concentrate on that. I noticed that he was losing a lot of money through professional lets. And so when a tenant left, every month we'd have a void period, we'd have bad debt. So when I left university in the year 2000, I decided to restructure it. And now we've got over 500 tenants. My father still got his small portfolio. Me and my brother built quite a large portfolio for ourselves. And today we can boast a 100% rent collection record and a very high 98% occupancy rate. We'll be talking to you about that in greater detail later on as we go along. There's a lot for us to cover tonight because I appreciate that it's quite a broad topic that I've said that we're going to cover. And I've spent quite a bit of time today going through the slides, seeing if we can input more. And I appreciate that at points we may be rushing through periods. So if you think that you need further clarification on something, please feel free to ask. Like I said, there's a question section right on the other side, and I'm always happy to stop and have a quick chat about it. So admittedly, shameless plug, yes, I do run courses, I do run workshops. I run one about how to maximize your rent from single let properties. I run a course on how to set up HMOs correctly where all tenants pay the utility costs themselves. I also in touch with a lead generation company, as well as can assist with raising finance. Finally, I'd say one of the best things that I did last year was that I wrote a column for YPN magazine. And if you don't mind, would you mind just saying whether you've either seen my column or you've heard about it? It's called Ask Arsh in the YPN magazine. Here's one of the, I would probably say one of the better articles that I've wrote. I think it was June or July last year, and it was talking about how to increase the revenue without making physical changes to your property. Paperwork equals profits. That's not what we're going to be talking about today. That's a completely different strategy. But again, if that's of interest, please come and have a chat with me at the end. So we're going to go straight into what is rent to rent. And it's very simple. And it's something, believe it or not, that people have been doing for years and years and years. And it has been very popular in the commercial sector. And I'd say it's only the last couple of years that people have really started to click onto it through residential property. I've done it in a 3-step process. So you've got a landlord who owns a property. They may have either decided to rent it out themselves and manage the property themselves, or they gave it out to a letting agent who takes on all the management, the risk for the property. Then there's you in the middle. You're the entrepreneur that would like to rent the property off the landlord with a view of then giving it to party number 3, who would be the tenant who would live in the property. So in essence, you've rented the property off the landlord, and then you're going to sublet the property to people who's going to be living in the property. And it's going to be very much working on the basis that you're going to be subletting the property. You're going to be making some slight modifications to the property in order to multi-let the property. So in essence, yes, you'll be creating a house of multiple occupation. Has anyone on the webinar tonight actually got a HMO, or are you new to HMOs? If you could give me an indication as to what your level of experience is, which will also then give me an indication as to how much depth you want me to go into this. So a couple of people saying that they're relatively new to HMOs. So a few people say they've got some say I've got none. Yeah, some people say, yeah, haven't got a HMO. Okay, now let's break this down to its simplest possible form. So you approach the landlord with your proposition. You then have to do some work to the property, providing that the landlord is happy with what you've put forward to them. You have to then go off, take the property off them, do some work to the property to multi-let the property. You then have to let the property out, hopefully for a lot more money than what you're paying the landlord, which would then, in theory, equals profit, cash flow. Right, okay, so we've got a lot of newbies on. No problem. We're going to take it one step back. Just imagine this blue box is a house, and regardless whether you're new to a property or whether you're a buy-to-let investor, when you purchase a property, normally you've got 4 walls and a roof, and whether it be a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-bedroom house, sometimes you may just decide to let it out as a standard single-let house to a family. They pay you on the 1st of every month or whatever date is set. The money comes in on that date, you pay your mortgage, and let's just say, for argument's sake here, you're charging that family £550. Your mortgage on that property every month is about £300. So you're left with cash flow of about £250 per calendar month, which is good. But then after you've taken out little things like, I don't know, let's say maintenance, that starts to eat into the cash flow. So maybe you're not making £250 a month. And the way that I would look at this strategy it is a very safe strategy. Money comes in, money pays a mortgage, and you've left with a bit of cash flow. But admittedly, this isn't going to make you rich overnight. And there's no such thing as a get-rich-quick scheme. Let's get that completely out of our heads. And the rent-to-rent strategy is a strategy that will allow you to generate a large amount of cash flow. And providing that you do it correctly, you can also do it to a point where you will protect yourselves. So first question come in from Diane: how do you find the landlord to do the rent-to-rent strategy? And that, I knew that was going to be a big question. So that what we're going to do, we're going to cover that in great detail later on. Now, going back one slide. So that's a very risk-averse strategy. And if you want a simple and hassle-free, not a transaction, but hassle-free life, this is very easy to do, providing that you've got the right tenants. However, let's just imagine that we've just bought a 4-bed property with 2 reception rooms. Now, let's just imagine that we let each room out individually. So we've got 4 bedrooms upstairs. We've got 1 front reception room, 1 living room, 1 kitchen and 1 bathroom. Now, it doesn't always have to work like this. So every property is different. I'm going to take you through a few examples of what we've done with some of the properties that we've got on rent to rent. So on the basis that rooms 1, 2, 3 and 4 on the first floor, they're each rented out individually. And the average for a bed sit is around, £300 per calendar month, especially in the West Midlands. May vary according to where you are in the country. And then that 1 reception room that we had at the front of the property, you can also potentially turn that into another bedroom, providing that there's still a communal facility somewhere for them to sit. There are lots of different rules and regulations when you start going to houses or multiple occupation. Potentially, you could turn the living room into room number 6. But that is also dependent on the size of rooms number 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So there are lots of legalities that you do need to know about when you're creating a HMO. You need to know whether you're in a selective licence area, whether you're in Article 4, whether you require a HMO licence, what are the regulations, what the room size is, what the amenity standards. So there's a fair bit to learn but it's very easy to do. But more importantly, if you know someone that can guide you through it, even better, because it'll save you a hell of a lot of time. So on the basis that you've got 5 rooms for this example, where each room's generating £300 a month, you're going to be left with £1,500 a month, but then you've got to minus your costs. In this scenario, let's just say you're paying the landlord a rent of £500 a month. But then, in this scenario, again, it would be an all-inclusive model, which means that you, as a person that's rented the property off the landlord is no longer responsible for any of the bills, you are. But then you've got to then split the rooms up, charge each room a separate rent, and then normal practice is, unless you're housing students, normal practice is that you as a landlord would take on the responsibility of the utility bills. So that would be council tax, water rates, electricity and gas. And on average, that is about £400 a month for a 5-bed property. So after you've taken off the rent that you pay to your landlord and your utility costs, so that total cost is £900, you're left with a profit of £600 in comparison to a property that would have only been generating you £250 as a standard single let. Now, just so that I know and that you're still on the same page as me, can you just type in that you've all got that? And are there any questions at this point? One person's put, John has very kindly said, what sort of costs are you looking at for the refurb? Lots of different factors here. What's the condition of the property? What does the property already have? To create a HMO, each room has got to have a fire door, half-hour fire door, which means that it's then going to have smoke seals, which means it also got to have a thumb-turn lock. Depending on the kind of property, depending on the people that you're due to house, you may need a fire alarm. Depends whether it's 2-story, depends whether it's 3-story, depends whether they're sharing facilities. So there's so many different factors that you've got to take into consideration. So that could vary your cost from £1,000 to £5,000. If you're only changing doors and it's a 2-story property and you just need an interlinked smoke system, potentially you could get away with £500 per room. If it's a 3-story property where you've got to do some modernisation works, if the property is not already in a good enough standard to let it out, you may need to spend more. But again, when you take this on, you'll already know this, because obviously you're not going to accept a property that you wouldn't have already seen. So I'm going to take it one step further, going as to why would you do this strategy? Why wouldn't you just stick with the fail-safe single let property? But more importantly, why will this strategy help you increase your cash flow a lot quicker? If you're working on the basis that you've got the single let property and it's generating you £250 a month, how many months will it take you, or how many years will it take you to generate another deposit for another property? Now, I always say to everyone that I speak to that it's always good to have more than one or more trick up your sleeve. I've got quite a few. I've got I've got a hell of a lot of a large portfolio, but more importantly, I've also started to gather quite a large portfolio in the rent-to-rent strategy too. I only started this in May 2013, and I'll let you know into the story why in a short while. And the reason why I like this is that if I needed to go out and purchase a property, I would now need to go and find a 25% deposit as a property. And let's just keep numbers very simple and safe here. Property that I've seen is £100,000. Mortgage company will lend me 75% loan to value or loan to purchase, which in this instance would mean £75,000. Which means that I need to find a deposit of £25,000 plus costs for legals, as well as any refurb work, as well as any valuation fees. So potentially I will need to I'll need in excess of £30,000 If I haven't got £30,000, that's the end of my property journey after property number one. Whereas rent to rent works fantastically well because I don't require a mortgage. There's no solicitors required or mortgage surveyors. No 25% deposit required. In actual fact, very little capital required to get going. And it's a lot easier to generate cash flow from properties and very easy to grow into a business. But more importantly, you are the driving force behind your business. You determine the terms of the agreement. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, how do you determine the terms of the agreement? If the person owns a property and they're renting it to you, surely they determine the terms of the agreement. Yes and no. Yes, because they don't have to let the property to you. And if their terms don't fit their criteria, then they'll say, sorry, we're not letting it to you. But no, because you're holding the trump card that you're going to be taking the property off them, not just for 6 months as a standard tenant would, but hopefully you'd be taking it for anything up to 7 years. Reason why we say 7 years is you can't go over 7 years because anything over 7 years needs to be lodged with land registry. So the homeowner or the investor that you're renting the property off would have to go and lodge it against land registry, which very much of them won't want to do because that seems like hard work. But if you're taking it off for 7 years on the basis that you're going to be taking on the maintenance and you're going to be looking after the property for them for the next 7 years, why wouldn't they? They've got this very much this hands-off investment that they've always wanted. Now, on the flip side, you've got a property that hasn't cost you anything to acquire, but now it's going to be generating you some cash flow. And if you haven't got a fat lot of cash to start with, this could be a great way for you to start saving a deposit quickly. Now, just imagine that you've got this one property which is generating you £600 a month. At the end of year one, providing that it's all let out and it's all done well, that's going to be generating you £7,200 a month, per annum. Potentially, within 4 years, it could generate you a deposit to purchase a property. And that's what I do with my rent-to-rent business. I leave all the money that I generate in this company specifically to one side. And I use the money from this company alone to pay down my debt on my portfolio. I still buy property. Sorry, I still buy property, and we are still taking on debt. But in the same respect, when we're still paying down debt, because I'm a big believer that you should be at a point, or you should have a vision in life where you should be completely debt free. So we're going to take it a little bit further on. So does everyone understand really what the basics of rent to rent is? If you don't, or if you need me to go into further clarification, now is the time to point it out. Some people are saying, yeah, perfect strategy to get me started as a newbie. If there's anything that you don't understand about it, now is the time to talk about it. No? Okay, so far everyone's saying, yeah, we're good to go. Brilliant. Okay. As with anything, when you're starting something completely new, the hardest part is to understand, what do I do? How do I get started? And to be perfectly honest, it's very much the same as you would as if you're looking to buy a property below market value. You've got to do a bit of hard graft. So you've got to start thinking it is a numbers game. Not every landlord you're going to go to is going to say, yes, okay. They're going to say, Randy, no, unfortunately, we're not going to let the property to you. And I had one, even a person my stature as well. When I go out to a property, I've got it to a point where I've got the pitch almost perfect, to the point where I'd say 99% of the time, I come back with the keys for that property after viewing it. And I got introduced to a property recently in Walsall, in West Midlands, just off Junction 10 of the M6. The property was perfect. This was introduced to me through a letting agent. And you can work with letting agents because, believe it or not, letting agents actually want to rent their properties. And if they can find a solution where they can rent a property to you, where you're going to be hassle-free management for them, and you're just going to pay them month in, month out, one monthly payment, start of every month, they take their commission off and they pay it off to the landlord. Why wouldn't they let you? So I've got it to a point. So this guy, he called me and says, Arsh, I've just been out to see a property. We've appraised it. We think it's worth around $850 a month. We think it could be a HMO as well. But they go, that you're the guy to know about that. Why don't you come out and have a look at it? I went out, had a look at it the next day. It was exactly what we were after. And I said, said to a letting agent, okay, deal done. I want it for 7 years. I said, ideally, I want to pay around £800 a month because I did my calculations on it. And on that basis, yeah, we'll take it for 7 years. He went back, he goes, yeah, I don't see a problem with that. Property needed a bit of work. I needed to do his fire doors. I needed to put a fire alarm in because it was over 3 stories. It needed licensing. I was going to have to spend the best part of £2,500 on the property. I already had that in my head. So it's going to, for the first few months, I wasn't going to see any cash flow out of it because I'd be recuperating my cost. Or alternatively, you can structure it to a point where instead of saying, well, for the first 3 months, it's not going to cost me anything. Why don't you say that? Why don't I spend that £2,500 over 5 years or 7 years, so that in theory, it's only going to cost me £50 a month over the next 5 years. £50 times 52 weeks is £300 a year. £300 over 5 years is £1,500. Okay, so slightly more. So, but you get the gist. So everything was fine. Agent started to send me details. I sent him back just the standard things that I want in a contract. And he goes, yeah, okay, no problem. And we arranged to meet the following Monday so that I can take the keys. The property was still having a bit of work done from the landlord. And the property, I was due to pick up the keys on the 1st of September, but the contract wasn't due to start until the 1st of October. Because I negotiated a rent-free period, and I always want a rent-free period on all the rent-to-rents that I do. Reason being is that I'm going to be spending a lot of money on the property. And on that basis, I want something out of the landlord, because if I'm spending, I don't want to be paying him the rent for that month if I'm spending money on his property. That's just my personal belief. I know other investors that do. They're happy to take the property on from day one, knowing that for month one, they're not going to see any cash flow whatsoever. Property is going to be vacant. Property is going to be looking to be renovated. And it, in that respect, it works for one. It doesn't work for me. And then I got a call from the agent, and he said, unfortunately, the landlord's not too happy with you turning the property into a HMO. Considering that the property's been empty best part of 3 or 4 months, I would have thought the landlord would have been really happy for someone to take it off him for 7 years. But unfortunately not. And I spoke to the agent that I've got to know quite well. And once you start working with agents, believe it or not, they'll send you a lot of properties very quickly. Because if they know that they're going to get a landlord's going to come to them, they've got property that's been vacant 4 months, that all that agent has to do is make one call to you, who's the number one person in your area. And you're going to say, yeah, no problem, letting agent, I'll have it. Landlord's going to be happy. Letting agent's going to be happy. Landlord's going to give the letting agent more instructions, so the letting agent is going to be even happier. Letting agent is again going to be further even happier, because they don't have to do anything to that property. All they've got to do is pick up the keys from the landlord and drop it off to you as a tenant. And they've got to sign some documents in the middle. And it is so easy to find for a letting agent. Now, remember, it's a numbers game. So you are going to have to, you decide whether you're going to start door knocking, whether you're going to start putting leaflets out, whether you're going to start putting adverts, local paper, how you're going to approach the landlords, how you're going to find out where the landlords are. There are so many strategies for these, and these are things that I've done over a number of years, since May last year. And these are things that I can possibly help you with. I can't go through all of them within an hour. It normally takes the best part of a day. But more importantly, you've got to be able to offer the landlord some form of incentive for them to offer you their property. Remember, my incentive to them is A, I'm going to be upgrading your property. B, I'm going to be taking it off you for 7 years. C, you're not going to have to worry about that property for 7 years. More importantly, put yourselves now in the landlord's shoes. If a newbie investor walked up to you, and I'm just going to pick a name out of the box here, John. If a newbie investor walked up to you and said, "Hi, John, I've seen that you've got property to rent. I want to take it off you for 7 years." And I have people like this contact me all the time. And the first thing that goes through my mind as the landlord would be, how is this person going to be able to pay my rent month in, month out? Regardless of whether you've got the rooms let out or not, you still have to pay your landlord. You've still got that liability where you have to pay the landlord. Now, my agreements are slightly different, and I'm going to go through that in in greater detail in a short while. And I appreciate that we've also got quite a number of questions lining up, so we're going to spend a bit of time in those in a few minutes. You've got to be able to go into that property, and that landlord's almost got to fall in love with you there and then, saying, "Yes, Arsh, okay, you can have the property off me. You can have it off me for 7 years. You can do what you want with the property as long as I get my rent paid." And we're going to go through some examples of that. But more importantly, from your point of view, you are now the tenant for this property, and you are now going to start subletting the property. I'm going to give you a few words of advice here. I've seen far too many investors up and down the country chasing properties that just don't work financially. And my advice goes to you is that once you've identified the property, you've got to sit down and you've got to do some numbers. I've got spreadsheets that I've literally broken down so that it can specifically tell me to a point where it breaks even. So if I take a property and I convert it into rooms, how many rooms is it going to take me to break even, taking into consideration the landlord's money as well as the utility costs? And I've got to say, if it doesn't work for you, walk away from the deal. Because believe it or not, part of what you've just learned is the experience of how to deal with a landlord. But more importantly, you've got to put in somewhere a break clause to get out of the property if it doesn't work for you. And for those that don't know what a break clause is, you've got to put it somewhere in that contract to say to the landlord, with the best will in the world, I want to take this property off you for 7 years. But somewhere along there, if it's not working for me, I need to be able to walk away. Now, some landlords might look at you a little bit funny and think, well, okay, 1 minute he's telling me 7 years, next minute he's saying that he wants a break clause. But you've got to look on the long term that hopefully you're not going to be sending that property back. Out of all the rent-to-rent deals that I've done, I've never had to send one back. But more importantly, I picked one up just over 3 weeks ago off a well-known HMO landlord in Wolverhampton. He took it off another investor and he couldn't make it work. But I took it on straight away. I had to spend a little bit of money on it. I think I spent £200 on it to bring it up to standard. And now it's fully let out. But my break clause in all my contracts is 1 month's notice. The largest break clause I've ever given in one property is 12 months notice. So actually, I'll talk you through it. But before we do that, let's just go through some questions. So Chris has asked, I live in Cornwall. Do I need to travel to a big city? Not at all. Because providing that you can demonstrate, the one thing that you've got to get in your own mind, Chris, is that is there a demand for a HMO where you are? If you take the property off a landlord and the landlord's happy to let it to you, are you then going to be able to let the rooms? That's the biggest question that you've got to ask yourself. If the demand's not there, unfortunately, yes, you may have to go to a bigger city. Neil has asked, how do you get the agreement from the landlord's lender to multi-let, and what happens if they say no? Right. this is a grey area. If the landlord insists on going to a lender to find out whether they're going to be able to do it, I would say 7 times out of 10 the lender is going to say no. It's down to something that I put in my agreements. It's down to the landlord to find that out. As far as I'm concerned, I'm paying the landlord the money every month. Whether they decide to pay the mortgage or not is completely up to them. You can take it one step further and you can arrange to have the mortgage paid out of your bank account so that you know it's being paid. Personally, for me, that seems a bit too messy. And when you start to talk with terms like, yeah, I'll take over your payments with landlords, guess what? They're going to walk away because it's a bit too controlled for them. So that's a grey area. If they do decide to approach the lenders and say no, unfortunately, you've got no deal. Anna's asked, hi Arsh, when you take on a property from a landlord, you need them to change their mortgage to a HMO mortgage. Will the standard buy-to-let be okay from our purposes? Again, another grey area. Yes, you're taking the property on, but you're acting as a tenant. So from the landlord's point of view, they haven't done anything wrong because they've let the property to you on a standard agreement. Now, because the mortgage is with the landlord, not you, they haven't done anything wrong. From the other point of view, what you decide to do with the property, providing that it allows you to sublet, you've done nothing wrong because you've got the right to sublet. Does that make sense? John's asked, what do you find the objections are with the landlords when you want to change their property, as such regarding walls, individual electrics if necessary? Objections. I would be completely upfront with your landlord saying that I'm going to be taking this property on and I'm going to be turning it into rooms. I'm going to be letting it by the rooms. And the reason why I say that is that if I take their property on and if I'm giving them £500 a month, the maximum I'm going to be able to let it out as a standard single let to a professional is say 600. So if I paid the landlord 500, I'm making 600. Guess what? I'm not actually making any money. So you have to be upfront with them from day one. If they don't like the fact that you can do some works to it, unfortunately, you've got no deal. Anthony's asked, how quick do you find the tenants? It's very much area dependent, but again, it is a great question because you've got to make sure that you've got the demand in your area. For me, finding tenants isn't a problem because I've got high street location and I advertise in quite lots of different medias. And like today, I've probably taken the best part of 50 calls from different tenants all looking for accommodation. I'm now that go-to person about property in my location, and I can teach you how to do that too. Going through some more questions. I would want to do credit checks on them. As the landlord, unfortunately, if you're going to start putting credit checks on the landlord, sooner or later, they're going to say, you know what, unfortunately, I don't like the questions that you're asking me, so let's forget the deal, and they're going to walk off from you. You've got to be quite amenable to landlord. There's got to be a bit of trust involved here as well. They could turn around and say, well, I want to do a credit check on you, or I want a personal guarantee off you. Personally, I wouldn't put a personal guarantee against someone else's property. So the more you ask off them, the more they're going to come back and ask off you. So there's got to be a bit of a handshake agreement here, but it's also put into the agreement. Do you fix your rent for the X number of years? Are you doing the rent to rent? How do you deal with rent increases? I don't increase it. When I take the property on from day one, I take the property on from that fixed price for the first 7 years. Then there's potential for them to potentially increase the rent, providing that they can demonstrate that there's been a shift in increasing rent for me too. What type of tenants do you house? If DSS houses different to professionals in the multi-let? Good question, but for me, I don't see that there is a difference between professional and DSS tenants because I've got HMOs which are purely DSS. I've got HMOs where we're a mixture of professional and DSS. I haven't got a HMO full of professionals because I don't really have that many. And then someone says, I think the first one you will be the hardest, as you mentioned. Yes, very true, because when you're figuring out a new strategy and you're trying to iron out all the creases, it will be the hardest, but you'll learn the most from the first. And then once you've got the process, the rest just fall into your lap. What if the landlord wants a 1 month break clause as well as pulls the plug after you've done it? See, this all comes down to your agreement. If they want a 1 month get out clause, unfortunately, you shouldn't be taking that property on, because very rightly, as you said, you could do all the work and he could very much say, well, thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for spending money on my property, but unfortunately, I think I'm going to do this myself. So you've got to protect yourself because it is your business and you're spending your money on it. Do you ever take on an option to buy of any of these properties? That's one of the best parts of this, is that in your agreement, you can put in there that you say that I'm going to take it off you for 7 years, but at the end of the 7 years, I want the first option to purchase. And I've done that in some of my agreements. Whether I decide to exercise it or not is completely different. So moving forward, the one thing I forgot to put is that, like I said, the break clause in a majority of my rent-to-rent is 1 month's notice, which means that at any one point in that 7 years, I can give the landlord 1 per calendar month's notice, and I can walk away from the deal, which means that in reality, not my risk to any property at any given point in 1 month's rent. But saying that, the way that my agreements are worded to the point where it says that if they want to walk away from me, they've got to give me the rest of the term's notice. So if we're in year 1, they've got to give me 6 years notice. I've spent money on that property. I've taken time and effort to create that property. It's not something that they can just take off me very simply, because like I said, it's taken me a long time to create it. And you know, when they're at this point where they're letting the property to you for a long term, it'll be highly unlikely that someone comes back to you and says, unless you're actually not paying their rent, that they'll want to take the property off you. Now we're going to go through a couple of examples, and what you'll find is that the people that I've done these deals with aren't in a distressed situation. Majority of the people have been people who just want an easy life. Now, here's a property. Admittedly, it doesn't look like Buckingham Palace, but no property that you take on ever will. So the owner is a dentist. He's owned the property for just over 10 years with his father, and he owns a dentist surgery not too far away from the property, and he was sick of tenants going to see him at the surgery halfway through dealing with patients. So he approached me and he goes, Arsh, okay, I've got a property. And he had letting agents who weren't managing the property correctly. And in the property, there was 5 studio flats. And he goes, Arsh, okay, I've got this property. Each one generates around £100 a week. So 5 studio flats, so it's generating £500 per week, which is just over £26,000 a year, which is a good income for one property. And he turned around and he goes, sorry, I was just reading a question. So he turned around and said, well, okay, you can have it off me for £95 a week, each flat. And I said, thank you very much, but all I'll be doing is I'll be running around just to please yourself. And I said, okay, thank you very much, not for me. And then we started to and froing, and we started to do a bit of work. Eventually, after a few weeks of negotiations, and sometimes these negotiations take a bit of time, we took it on a 5-year lease, but I now give him £52 per studio per week, which means that I pay him £1,125 per month, which is equivalent to £13,520 per annum. But I let these studios out at £105 a week, which means that I'm generating £2,275 a month, or just over £27,000 per annum. So after all, I don't pay any bills on this because the studios were already completely split, so they had separate electricity and separate gas meters. So after everything, I'm generating £1,147 from this property, and I haven't done anything unusual here. One of the persons report, are we going to be covering about how to get these deals and what to say and what not to say? Yes, we are, because what we're going to be doing, we're going to be going through a bit of a role play through what to say to landlords. Second example is another one. Again, not a distressed situation. It's the property on the left-hand side with the white double glazed windows. Factory worker owned the properties for 2 years, was using a letting agent just to do let-onlys and didn't like the day-to-day management. And in this property, they had 5 bedsitters and one bedroom flat. Again, I took this on a 7-year lease where I put in the break clause that I can give 1 month's notice at any given time, and I don't give any deposits or rent in advance. I only pay from the day that I take it on from. So total for this property, I'm paying just over £14,500 per annum, but it generates me just under £23,500 per annum. I have to pay some utilities here, council tax and water rates only, because each of the rooms are already metered. I didn't spend the money on that. So these 2 properties that we've already spoken about, they were already HMOs and studio flats in their own right. Nothing wrong with them. And the landlord just wanted to get shifted them just because they don't like the hassle of dealing with them. Now, this is probably one of my better ones, because better ones in respect that the person that I took this property off told me that they couldn't make it work. And the owners are a couple of factory workers, so a husband and wife work in a factory, work very long days, and they became accidental landlords. They inherited this property. They've owned it for the best part of 2 years, and they was using an agent for let-onlys, and again didn't like day-to-day management. Then they gave it to another large landlord in West Midlands that deals with HMOs, and he took it off them for £450 a month. Now, when they told me, when the HMO investor came to me and told me this, first thing I thought of is far too much rent for what it was. So he was going to give the property back to the landlady. And I said, well, before you do that, why don't we do something where you put me in contact with the landlord and I'll give you a finder's fee. So we did that. He gave the property back to the landlady. Admittedly, she wasn't in the best of moods because she thought she took on the property. Someone had taken the property off her for 7 years, and within 6 months, they'd handed it back to her. Now, she liked the thought that someone else was willing to come in, but naturally she was very cautious because her fingers had just been burned on the basis that someone had already promised her the earth and never delivered. And so I had to spend a bit of time with it. It took a few meetings to get around to my way of thinking. I also had to take around a bit of my portfolio just to let her know that I wasn't a fly-by-night. But on that basis, we now have taken the property off her. We're on a 7-year lease, but I'm not paying £450 a month like the other investor. I'm only paying £350 a month, and I had to show her that at £450 a month, that property will never make me any money. I will be running around like a busy fool, specifically just to pay her. And on that basis, we've got each property, each room let out at £75 per week, which is £300 a week or £1,300 a month, which generates £15,600 a year. But with this one, we're having to pay £400 utility costs every month. So take out the landlord cost and the utility cost, we're still left with £550. But £550 doesn't seem a lot of money for a HMO, and people normally say that 4-bed HMOs don't work. But in this scenario, if it's cost me nothing and my risk to this property is £350, why wouldn't you take it on? Other people, if you were committed to this agreement for 7 years and you would have to pay 7 years of rent, rain's little shine, I would be worried too. So if you've got a bit of vision, you can take it one step further. I've done this on a former 19-bed care home. It was closed for 4 years, but still like brand new inside. The landlord was stuck for options because it didn't adhere to care home regulations, but it was perfect for HMO use. So he was stuck with options until he met me. Now, I've taken it off him for 7 years on the basis that I'm going to be paying him £1,500 a month, which is a lot of rent, admittedly. But the break clause with this one is that I have to be committed to it for a year. And then after a year, at any point, I can give him 6 months' notice. So my risk to this property is 18 months initially, or if I can get through the first 12 months, my risk then is only 6 months. But I'm going to be renting it out as a 19-bed care home where I'm going to be generating £79,000 per annum. But my view with this is that I'm going to be increasing it to a 25-bed HMO, which is also going to be increasing the cash flow. But the cherry on top with this one is that it also sits on quite a large development plot. So I've said to the landlord, and we've put the clause in the contract that if I can sell the property, he wants £300,000 for this property within 7 years, which we've agreed. I've said that if I can sell it where I don't buy it myself but sell it on to someone else, anything in excess of that £300,000, I get a 50% of the uplift in value. So let's say that we sell it for £500,000. I've just got this rent for the next 7 years, as well as £100,000 of uplift. So let's just say that for 7 years, I'm going to be generating £79,000. 7 times 80, £560,000. Take out our costs, which is £18,000 a year. So let's say £20,000 a year. So that's 140 from 56. We're still making good money. Then add on another £100,000 just for creating the uplift in the property. And these are all things that you can do just by looking at the property. But more importantly, these are things that you can incentivize the landlord with, to saying, well, if you allow me to do this, how about if we do this where we create a win-win scenario? So in this scenario, the property was already shut down. I'm taking it on and bringing it back into use. But more importantly, the landlord sees a vision that I'm going to create him a lot more money within 7 years. So he's getting 7 years worth of rent at £18,000 a year. But then on the basis of that, at the end of it, he's going to have an asset which, if we can sell for £500,000 or £600,000, let's say £500,000, he's then going to have £400,000 in the bank as well. So someone's asked, how can you sell property power of attorney? What you put a restriction in place. A restriction is just basically a document to say that whilst you're doing a deal with the landlord can't sell it without your signature. So that's very easy to do. That's called an RX1, and you can download those from the Land Registry website. So again, there's so many different ways and let's go through about what you say to landlords. A couple of things that you don't want to say to landlords straight away is that your property's worth 500 and I'm going to give you 250. Automatically, he's going to shut the door in your face. You need to first of all get your foot through the door. So there are lots of ways that you do that. First of all is how you market yourself. You've got to. Sorry, I'm just going through questions. So you've got to find that landlord. Remember what I said. Not every landlord you go to is going to say yes to you straight away. Because first of all, you've got to find a system that works directly and specifically well for you. You may not want to deal with landlords. You may only want to deal with letting agents, because letting agents may be a little bit more amenable to what you're trying to do. Remember what I said? Letting agents only want to take people like yourself on who may have a bit of knowledge and is going to be a hassle-free tenant for them. And on that basis, so you may decide, I'm not going to start touting out for private landlords. I just want to go specifically to letting agents. And there is almost like a role play that you've got to do with a letting agent, but it's almost like with everything, you've got to get to know them. They've got to become familiar and comfortable with what you are and what you do. If they haven't got the confidence that you can take that property off them and pay them rent month in, month out, and give them no hassle, they're not going to show the property to you. But more importantly, they're not even going to call you. So we can go through so many different scenarios. I could tell you about scenarios where a landlord's kicked me out of his property because when I started it, initially, I went to a landlord, it's worth £500, I'll give you 350. And he said, thank you very much for your time, but unfortunately, I can rent this property out for £500 every day of the week. So there's got to be a give and take. You've got to be able to offer in something, and they've got to be able to offer you something. If they're all very much, yes, I want £500 a month, I want it for the next 7 years, there's no break clause, we can't do anything with the property, you've got to say, thank you very much. Unfortunately, it's been a pleasure meeting you, but unfortunately, we can't do anything now. And you've got to have this scenario that you've got to have the willpower to walk away. And I've seen far too many investors just take on properties just for the sake of taking on the property. You've got to put in there something that protects your backside. Because remember, you're going to be doing a lot of running around. You're going to be going out and doing the work to the property. You're going to be going out. You're going to have to find the tenants. You're going to have to manage the tenants. Personally, for this strategy, I wouldn't put another letting agent in place. The one thing that you could say to your letting agent that's introduced you to the property to incentivize you is say to them, here you go, guys. What we'll do is that if I take the property off your landlord, I will then give the property back to you as 5 or 6 rooms. So not only are you making your money off your landlord, but you're making money off me because you're now renting 5 or 6 rooms out for me. Now, they've just had 2 bites of the cherry. How many more properties are they going to give you, knowing that they're going to get 2 lots of incomes, 2 lots of admin fees? They're going to get the admin fees off the tenants. They're going to get the reference fees off the tenants. They're going to get the rent. Do you see what I mean? It starts to work, and it starts to make it very profitable for a letting agent. Someone said, you make it sound so easy that letting agents in this series don't like subletting issue. How do you get around the issue? The easiest thing with a letting agent is go in and speak to them, but more importantly, go in and I wouldn't say chat them up is the right way, but just offer to take them out to lunch. Just figure out who they are. They need to know a little bit about you. If you're going to go in and you're going to offer them the earth, admittedly, they're going to turn around and say, well, here's another Tom, Dick and Harry that's just walked through the door and has offered me the earth, but it's not going to deliver anything. You can't say that you want to take on 50 properties off their books immediately. Try them in one. If that one works and they've got the ability or they've got the knowledge now that you can do it and you can deliver what you've said that you were going to do, they'll give you property number 2. And you don't always need a massive variety of letting agents. Just work with the one to start with. Get to see how they're working. So does that all make sense so far? I appreciate that we are running very short of time because we have run quite a lot in there. Now, the reason why I'm telling you all this is because I want some of you guys to actually make the right choice about what you do with your property. I'm in the process of creating something called what's going to be a HMO franchise. And for those that don't know, I've got quite a large HMO portfolio. And whether you've got cash or whether you're looking to do a rent-to-rent strategy, I want to possibly either JV or create a franchise with you where I can give you my time and my knowledge where you can go out and do this in your area. Admittedly, you've got to be someone that's going to be a progressive individual or someone that's going to be willing to dedicate a lot of time to this, because with this, it does require time. You'll have to go out and get I can show you where to get the property. I can tell you what to do with the property. You'll have to go out and you'll have to manage the property. You'll have to make sure that the rooms are rented out. So if you think that's of interest, I want to have a chat with you. Capital, if we're going to buy the property, you're going to need anywhere between £50,000 and £100,000, or whether we're going to do rent to rents, we can have a chat about that, but you're still going to need some capital input. There is a franchise fee of £10,000 and there is no, there's no denying that. Other funds required will be to either purchase the property with a mortgage and refurb, or just potential costs just to refurb the property. Plus you get all the support from myself and Arsh Ellahi, as well as the extensive training program to give you all the knowledge to get your HMO set up and running. you get you ready to manage your own property. More importantly, you get to either manage that property or own that property and become financially free. And you'll be in direct contact again with myself and Aki. If you'd like any more information on that, please send me an email to arsh.elahi@rent-me-now.co.uk. And my reason for that is that once we've got you to a stage where you've got enough properties to supply your existing income from your job, I now then want to progress you further up the ladder to become that person, that letting agent, which is another company that we're currently franchising, my letting agency, Rent Me Now. And again, you can go onto my website, which is rent-me-now.co.uk. We've nearly got 6 operating up and down the country. We only launched it in January this year. Finally, you might turn around and say, Arsh, okay, I like what you've done. I've liked what you showed me, but I don't want to come into business with you. But I've put a lot of documents as to what it takes to become a successful, hassle-free landlord, all onto a USB, which I now call the key to success. Normally, on there, some of the documents that we've got is a watertight and legal binding tenancy agreement, gas safety documents, guarantor documents, housing benefit, accountability spreadsheets, all the spreadsheets that you need so that your tenants aren't going to fall into arrears with you, as well as so many different templates to write to your tenants. And specifically for this webinar only, I'll also be thrown on my rent agreement. Normally, if you go on my website, that's £197. But today, as webinar listeners, you can have it for £98.50 just by going onto my website, which is arshellahi.com/shop. And if you type in the special promo code, which is RMNUSB, you actually can have it for half price for £98.50. So again, go to arshellahi.com/shop and use the promo code RMNUSB. Finally, if you like the thought of that and you want to know, admittedly, I can't teach you everything that you need to know within an hour. It's impossible. There's so many different scenarios that we need to go through. We need to understand who the landlord is. We need to also understand the psychology behind the landlord. What's their motive? What's their pain? Why do they want to do this? Why would they let the property out to you Why would they let the property out to you if they could let the property out themselves and make all the money themselves? So we cover a hell of a lot of knowledge, content in one day. And the next one that we're running, again, admittedly, a pilot, is on the Saturday the 13th of September, and the cost is going to be $345 for the day. And what we'll be taking you through, we're not just going to sit you down in the classroom and say, well, here you go, guys, this is what we're going to do. We're going to actually take you out to the properties and show you how we've converted it. So in the smaller one, the 4-bed one, we're going to show you how that one was already done and what we've had to do to bring it up to standard. So we'll take you around a minimum of 3 or 4 HMOs and learn how to acquire them with no or very little money down, how to find the properties and how to start touting for properties, how to approach the landlord and the terminology needed to take away the property, how to calculate whether the property will make money and calculate the risk. Remember, risk is a big part of this, because if you don't calculate how many rooms you need, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but that is a recipe for disaster. How to create a minimum of £600 cash flow from every property, what to do with the property, but more importantly, how to market the property to fill the rooms correctly. Again, some of the properties that we'll take you around: the one that was owned by the dentist, the one that was owned by the factory worker, and the smallest one. And if you've got the appetite, we'll take you around the largest one too. It is on the 13th of September, and it is £345 for the day. And if you email me to pay tonight, you can have the course for £345, and I'll actually throw in a USB with all my documents that you require to get you up and running today in for free. And you also have a copy of my forthcoming book, which is due in September 2014, completely free. So if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, it's got my email address, which is arsh.elahi@rent-me-now.co.uk. And if you think that's of interest, please get in contact with me. There's going to be a hell of a lot of knowledge that we're throwing in there. But more importantly, what we'll do, and I've just thought of this off the top of my head, For everyone that comes on the course, we're going to spend a bit of time with you, and we're going to go on sites like Rightmove, and we're going to be looking at what properties are in your area that you haven't discovered yet. And then we're going to be even making calls to some of the agents, some of the landlords, saying, well, listen, guys, okay, what do you think we can do here? How can we work together? But more importantly, hopefully by the end of that day, some of the delegates on that course will be walking away, going with an appointment to that property, and hopefully getting them on that journey. As with anything, you'll have direct contact to me. So you've got my personal mobile number. You can find me on all the social medias, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. But the best thing is you've got my personal mobile number, so we'll be in direct contact. So you can turn around and say, Arsh, okay, what do I need to do now? How do I do it? And I can guide you through that. But on that note, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us very nicely concluded, spot on time as well, first time ever, to the end of the presentation. Are there any questions? John has also asked, is that the 2-day one that you're running on the 20th and 21st of September? Unfortunately, this is a completely standalone course. On the 13th of September, I am only running a rent-to-rent course. I will only be talking about rent-to-rent strategies. On some of my other courses, I talk about how to create completely self-contained, or not self-contained, but HMOs where the utility costs are specifically passed on to the tenants. That's a completely different course. We couldn't combine the two, unfortunately, because that day alone takes a whole day by itself. Someone saying, is a care home for sale? Not yet, John, unfortunately. If that's of interest and you think that you want to buy it off me straight away, by all means, you've got my email address. Feel free to come back to me. So I think I've gone through all the questions. If there are any other questions, please feel free to get in contact, because now's the time. Or if you want, you can email me directly, and we can start to have a chat about it. I will be sending out the recording tomorrow morning, because there have been a couple of people that have registered onto the webinar, but unfortunately haven't been able to make it. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, if there are no other questions, sorry, here we go. Hi Arsh, what's the best way to determine the demand in my area, notably for DSS for those that don't have a street presence? That's a good question. There are loads of ways. Have you tried the local paper wherever you are? Have you tried Gumtree? There's a property portal specifically for benefit tenants, and it's called www.dssmove.co.uk, which is Delta Sierra Sierra Move.co.uk. I know it well because me and Aki have created it. And what it is, it's specifically a portal that will only accept properties on there that accept DSS tenants. So you could upload that property on there, and potentially we've got 120,000 people every month searching the site for properties up and down the country. We need landlords like yourself who can upload your property, and it's completely free for you to do it. So there's lots of different ways of attracting benefit tenants. You could potentially stand outside the job centre for a week handing out leaflets. There's nothing wrong with doing that, as long as you pick up the litter if there is any litter. You've just got to think outside the box. But more importantly, it's not about how you attract them, it's about what you put in the adverts that attracts them. There's certain buzzwords that benefit tenants have to connect with, and it's the buzzwords that will get you your tenants. Little things that I put in mind: no deposit, no upfront rent required. I can make it virtually possible for every tenant in the country to afford one of my properties. But if you're asking for a month up front and a month of a deposit, guess what? You've just made it impossible for a benefit tenant. If you've put that obstruction in front of them, you're not going to get the tenants. You need to make it possible for them to contact you. You need to make it possible for them to contact you and make it affordable. But more importantly, once Sorry, someone's just put, can you repeat the web address, please? It's www.dssmove, Delta Sierra Sierra move.co.uk. And you've got to make yourself be that person that is affordable to the market. If you're pricing yourself out of the market, you're not even going to rent it full stop. Out of all my properties, I don't accept a deposit. I don't accept rent in advance. I know the rent's going to get paid through some of my benefit services, through the benefits department anyway. I expect all my tenants to make a top up, and that's, I can teach you exactly how to do that. And in order to do that, the best way of doing it is by coming in and see me. So by all means, again, the next date that I can do that is on the 13th of September. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all very much for your time. It's been a pleasure spending the evening with you, and hopefully we speak very soon. Good evening. Take care. Bye.